quickly it opens. And release is how long it holds it open after the voice drops below the threshold. So if you're just doing speaking, well, once again, it depends, because if you have somebody who's really dynamic and is doing a lot of going up and down, you might want a long release time. Whereas if you have somebody who's really steady in their speech, you can have a very short release time. Once again, the reason they did the release time is because when some drums would ring out for a long time and they wanted to hear that decay of those drums, and others they just wanted to and have it shut off right away. So they gave you that release to kind of adjust and play with that. So that's a gate there. The next item is a compressor. Compressors are very cool, and I use them a lot. Okay, this is what a compressor does. It's the same kind of idea. It's got a threshold. It's got an attack and a release time, but it also has a ratio on it. And so what a compressor does is you set your threshold at a certain volume, and as long as the sound is beneath that threshold, it'll let it go through and it won't do anything to it. It just sits there and does nothing. But as soon as the sound goes over the threshold, it lowers it down just a little bit. And you set that by the ratio. So right now this ratio is set 3 to 1. So what that means is for every 3 decibels it goes over the threshold, it lowers it 1 decibel. So for vocals, so what I do, I always put a compressor, and I'll show you how to do this, on the main output. That's my favorite, and I put it at a 2 to 1 ratio. So for every 2 decibels it goes over the threshold, it drops it down 1 decibel. And I usually set that threshold pretty high. But for vocals, 2 to 1 is usually the sweet spot. You can go a little above that or a little below it, but that's usually the sweet spot. For instruments, especially like guitars, bass, or drums, you can crank it up to about 4 to 1 or 6 to 1. If you have ever heard like Metallica, they compress their entire sound at like 8 to 1. And the reason being is because when you do it to something that's got that much energy in it, it sounds like they're constantly trying to beat out of a box. And it becomes it's a sound they're going for. But you don't want to do that to... The other thing you can do, if you set it too tight, what happens is what you call... If you go up pretty much 10 to... let's see how high this one goes. Yeah, this goes infinity. It goes 10 to 1 and then infinity. So if infinity to 1, what it does is it creates what is called essentially a limiter, and it immediately stops everything at the threshold. Okay, now that's really good if you have a problem with somebody who's a really dynamic we use this on really dynamic preachers a lot, because they'll be talking like this and the next thing you know they're screaming their head off. And so we put that limiter on them so they just can't go above a certain volume. I also will put it, if I'm